Good evening and welcome to Burnsville Park and Natural Resource Commission meeting for June 4, 2018. First item is to approve the agenda for today's meeting. Commissioners, any item to add? Staff?
Nothing from staff.
Okay. I would like to make a motion to approve the agenda.
Motion approved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion moves. Second item for today is to approve the minutes for a meeting for May 21st, 2018. Any additions? Staff?
Nothing.
Okay. Like to have a motion to approve the minutes for May 21st, 2018 meeting?
Motion approved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion moves. Third item is citizens' comments. Seeing none, we'll move to our fourth item of today's meeting is Annual Deer Management Program Report, presenting Caleb Ashling.
All right, well, first off, thank you for having me, Commissioners. My name is Caleb Ashling. I'm a Natural Resources Specialist for the City of Burnsville, and I'm here to give the Annual Deer Management Report. So just a brief background on the program history. The Natural Resources Master Plan, developed in 1999, recommended that the city develop a deer management program. So from that recommendation, the city developed the deer management plan, which was adopted in 2001 by City Council. And that, among other things, set the population density goal for deer in the city. So this program is intended to address a few different concerns related to deer, especially deer at high population levels. One is deer-car collisions. So if you have high deer populations, you have more deer-car collisions, which is a potential injury risk for people and also can be expensive with car repairs. Then at high deer populations, we also have negative impacts to our natural areas. So overbrowsing by deer can cause damage to the native plant community and also prevent natural tree regeneration. Then landscaping depredation by deer can be an issue, especially at higher populations. So that's a problem that we heard from residents about. And then at high populations, there could be more risk for disease in the deer population. So what I'll be reporting on tonight is the past program year, so the 2017 and 2018 program year. Then I'll be making recommendations for the 2018-2019 program year. And just for your information, the program runs not for the calendar year, but from April 1st of one year until March 31st of the following year. So this past program ran from April 1st, 2017 until March 31st, 2018. So within the program, we have four major areas that the plan outlines. One is education. There's also a feeding ban component, a monitoring component, and a population control component. So I'll go over each of those individually. So for education, we try to provide information on the city website related to deer issues, links to the plan, and then updates on our management activities. And this snapshot here is an example of some additional information we added this past year to try to give residents some more information on how to identify deer damage on their plants versus rabbits or other animals. And also provide some additional recommendations for what residents can do to try to reduce deer issues, like fencing desirable plants, removing or using commercial deterrent products and other options like that. So we try to put some of that information on our city website, and then we also try to periodically run information related to deer in the Burnsville Bulletin. All right. So the city does have a ban on feeding deer. That was initiated along with the plan in 2001. We had one feeding violation that was documented in 2017. And when we get a report of feeding violations, we do a site visit. We either talk to the resident directly or send a letter. Then we do follow-up visits to make sure the issue has been resolved. And in all situations that I've been involved with, that's been enough to stop the issue. So our recommendation is to continue monitoring for these feeding issues and then send action letters as needed. So now on to the monitoring portion of the program. So that's broken out into a couple different areas. So we do aerial counts for the deer population. We also have a monitoring forum for residents to report their issues related to deer or their observations. Then we try to track car-deer collisions in the city each year. And then we do conduct a plant survey at Terrace Oaks Park that tries to get at impacts deer may be having on the vegetation. And then just so you're aware, when we talk about our deer management program, we often talk about it in our 6 management zones. So we do try to manage the city a little more individually per each zone. So we have a northeast, northwest, west central, east central, southwest, and southeast zone for the program. So we were able to conduct an aerial count this past year or early this year. Some years we're not able to due to low snow conditions, but this year we were able to get the survey in. The survey was conducted on January 24th. And this year we did the survey a little bit differently. In the past, the survey is done by helicopter over the priority deer habitats in the city. In the past, it had been done with city staff. This year we partnered with the Three Rivers Park District to do the survey. They conduct a lot of deer surveys for other cities throughout the metro area and also for their own large park reserves. They were already doing surveys at Murphy-Hanrahan Park for their deer population there and also doing surveys for the city of Bloomington. So it made a lot of sense for us to partner with them on the survey this year, save some staff time and also reduce costs for the program too. Their method is slightly different than ours, but overall pretty comparable. It's a little more intensive, so it involves a little more time spent in each area, which we expect would result in some additional deer being counted. All right, so this is on to the survey results. So the map on the left side of the screen here is the dots represent where deer were actually observed, so that number within each dot indicates how many deer were observed at that point. And then on the right side, we have a table that breaks down the actual numbers per each management zone, and we have 2 other survey years in here for comparison. So looking at 2018, the zone with the largest deer herd was the northeast zone with 83 deer counted. That is the area that has the wildlife refuge, so there's a lot of deer habitat down in the wildlife refuge, so that was not too surprising to have large deer numbers down there. The next largest count for the deer herd was in the southwest zone. That area also has Murphy-Hanrahan Park, so a very large natural area and a lot of large wooded lots. So we weren't surprised to see large numbers down there as well. We did have some jump in the population from past surveys, as you'll note. In 2017, we weren't able to conduct the survey due to winter conditions, so that's why that's not in there. In 2016, we had low snow conditions, and we felt that may have changed deer distribution in the city somewhat, so some of the deer were outside the city, more in large parks like Murphy-Hanrahan Park. So they weren't counted in the survey. And then we also had a new pilot and some new observers doing the survey, so we felt that there were some deer that were probably missed during that time period. But in 2015, we had a survey that was more within the range of what we've seen in the past. So that was closer to what we'd expect back in 2015. And since we haven't done a lot of management from 2015, if you factor in population growth each year, what the survey came out at this year is very reasonable. So we're confident in those survey numbers. And for our survey, what we're looking for is a baseline so we can make management decisions. So it's not necessarily tracking year to year. We want to have a survey of a minimum count of deer that were observed so we can have something to make some management decisions on how to proceed. So on to citizen monitoring. So we have a section of our website where residents can submit reports related to deer. We also will take calls and emails. We had 2 reports submitted this past program year. Both were from the Southeast Management Unit. There was reports, so that's around Alimagnet Park and Twin Lake. And we had residents that were reporting a large herd of deer in some fairly developed areas, so 10 to 15 deer in some fairly small suburban lot-sized areas. So on to our deer car crash data. So each year we try to tally deer car collisions in the city. We do that by working with the Burnsville Police Department and getting accident reports that were related to deer. Then we also get reports from animal control on where they did deer carcass pickups. We cross-reference those reports to remove any redundant reports, and then that's what we use for our at least minimum number of crashes in the city. We know some may go unreported. So we had 27 total this past year. The most were in southwest Burnsville, so down by Murphy-Hanrahan Park and Kelleher Park. There were 11 in that area. The next most were in the east central zone in the general vicinity of Terrace Oaks Park. There were 7 crashes in that area. And that's overall, 27 is down a bit from last year where we had 35. Next portion of monitoring is related to our deer exposure study at Terrace Oaks Park. So this study has been ongoing since 2001. We have 6 study plots out there. Some of these plots are fenced and some are unfenced. So some plots deer can't access to browse the vegetation within them, and some the deer can access. And we look to compare the differences between those fenced and unfenced plots. So what we found so far is that the fenced plots where deer can't access had higher average percent cover of native plants. As a graph shows here, we had 94% cover in the fenced plots on average. The unfenced plots where deer could access, we had 64%. So that indicates that there's likely some impact related to deer browsing vegetation. And keep in mind as well that during the course of this study, we were doing deer management in the area, so it doesn't necessarily represent what we'd see at really high deer population levels. It represents what we see when there was management ongoing. We also saw during the study that deer targeted certain species more than others, so they could have a higher impact on their preferred foods than some of their less preferred foods. Gooseberry was one example of a plant that we saw that they seemed to really target. So for monitoring, we recommend that we continue our annual methods that we've been doing. All right, on to population control. So we have a couple strategies to use for population control for the deer program. One is archery hunting, and the other is sharpshooting with the Burnsville Police Department when needed. So for the archery program, we do encourage archery hunting on private property where it's safe and allowable by city ordinance. Bow and arrow has to be discharged at least 200 feet from a private property boundary, so that limits archery hunting to some of the larger lots in town. Mostly that's in southwest Burnsville, but there is some private archery hunting in the city that happens. Then we also try to operate archery hunts on public land where feasible. So the one archery hunt that we had last year, and I've had for quite a few years now, was at Kelleher Park. This hunt was operated by an organization called the Metro Bow Hunters Resource Base. It's a nonprofit group that works with cities and other agencies to hold population control deer hunts in city parks. So there were 8 deer harvested this past fall through that hunt at Kelleher Park. The Murphy-Hanrahan Park Reserve also operates their own archery hunt. And there were 23 deer harvested in that. Murphy-Hanrahan Park is mostly outside of Burnsville, but about 10% of the park is within Burnsville. So for our program tracking purposes, we consider about 10% of their harvest, or 2 deer, to be harvested from Burnsville. And then for our sharpshooting program, we do utilize the Burnsville Police Department sharpshooters to cull the herd when needed. Because we are working off a lower count from a previous aerial survey, there was no sharpshooting conducted this last program year. So this table here shows the removal goals and actual harvest for the 2017-2018 program year. We had removal goals in the southwest unit and the east central unit. So in the southwest unit, we had a goal of harvesting up to 16 deer. And what we actually harvested were 10 deer. Those were through the 2 archery hunts that happened in that area. Then in the east central unit, we could have potentially harvested up to 5 deer per the program parameters. But because we weren't doing sharpshooting in any other area of town that year, we decided not to initiate sharpshooting since that number was fairly low. On to the recommended harvest for the 2018-2019 program year. So there's a lot of numbers on the table here. I'll kind of explain them per each column. So the population goal column indicates how many deer we'd ideally like to see within each management unit. The projected fall 2018 population is basically our aerial survey numbers from this past winter. And then we use a formula that's similar to what the DNR uses. It factors in winter mortality of deer. It factors in fawn birth in the spring, and then some summer mortality as well. And that gives us our projected population for this upcoming fall. And we use that projected population when we decide how many deer we should target for harvesting. So the last column is a recommended harvest for this upcoming year. As you can see, we have fairly high harvest goals for this year. In reality, we don't expect to be able to remove that many deer in one season. It's just not really feasible for how the program works. But we would like to do a population control to try to get those numbers closer to the goal levels that we've set in the plan. So our recommendations for population control are to conduct sharpshooting in the northeast, east central, west central, and southeast units. In the northwest unit, we don't have any access to land to do any population control, so we can't do management there at this time. Then the sharpshooting locations would be determined within those zones by deer activity later this season. And then for the southwest zone, we recommend continuing with the Kellerhare Park archery hunt. And we're proposing for commissioners' review 4 hunt periods. This is the same setup for the hunt as we've had in past years. All the dates are Thursday through Saturday, and they're September 27th through 29th, October 11th through the 13th, October 25th through the 27th, and November 8th through the 10th. And the park is closed during the hunts during that time period. And then the Three Rivers Park District also plans on conducting an archery hunt at Murphy-Hanrahan Park this year. This year they'll have 2 hunt periods for their hunt. They're also moving towards using the Metro Bow Hunters Resource Base, the same organization that the city's using for their hunt. So their hunts are proposed for September 28th through the 30th and October 26th through the 28th. All right, and with that, I would stand for any questions.
Commissioners, go ahead.
Just a curiosity question. What happens to the carcasses? Is the meat used after they're harvested?
Yeah, good question. So the deer are processed with a state-certified processor, and then the meat is donated to the 360's food shelf community here in Burnsville. So it's
good.
available for needy individuals.
Any other questions? Okay, so there are 2 asks. One is staff would like to know if you want to continue the recommended deer management strategy. The second one is would like to, if we want to make a recommendation or would like to keep the dates as it is from a staff. They would like to keep the management plan as it is and recommend approval for the 18 hunt dates. So, well, should we do, JJ, do we want to do 2 approval, or should we just bundle up in one?
I think you're fine if you put it in one.
In one?
Yes.
Okay. So if we are okay with one, I would like to have a motion to approve keeping the deer management program as it is, and then follow the recommendation from the staff for the 2018 archery hunt dates. Would like to have a motion to move? Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And motion moves. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioners.
And the next item is for the state of the lake updates, and Caleb is also doing an update on that.
All right, so bear with me for one more presentation from me. This is the State of the Lakes presentation. It's basically a brief overview on what's been going on in some of the major water bodies in Burnsville for the past year. So commissioners are probably aware, but just for a quick review, Burnsville is a part of three major river watersheds, the Credit River, the Vermilion River, and the Minnesota River. So the Credit River watershed within Burnsville is shown in green in the southwest corner of the city. There's no major water bodies within that watershed, but there is a large wetland complex at Kelleher Park. The Vermilion River watershed within Burnsville contains Lake Alimagnet, but that's the one major water body within that watershed. Then the main watershed within Burnsville is the Minnesota River, and that's the tan or yellow on this map. So that's where most of the water ends up flowing to. It does flow through a system of stormwater pipes, and most of our lakes and water bodies are connected somehow. I just wanted to walk the commissioners through that a little bit. So the upper part of the watershed within Burnsville is down in the southeast corner. So Lac La Vanne Lake, although it doesn't really outlet, but hypothetically, if it did, it would flow to Keller Lake. From there, stormwater moves to Crystal Lake. Then it flows on to Twin Lake, where it's joined by waters from Wood Pond. Then it flows to Early Lake, through another pond, onto Sunset Pond, down through the Kramer Nature Preserve, and then on to the Minnesota River. So that's kind of how water travels through our system, at least through the major water bodies in town. And I just ask the commissioners to also keep in mind when we talk about water quality projects like at Keller Lake or Crystal Lake that those projects may improve water within those water bodies, but because water outlets downstream, it also ends up improving water quality in the downstream water bodies as well. All right, so I'll be looking at water quality in the city in a couple of different ways. One is according to the state standards for lakes, and the other will be comparing water quality to the city's water clarity goals within its water resources management plan. So the state monitors a number of different things, but the prime ones that we look at are phosphorus. High phosphorus relates to a lot of algae. Chlorophyll A, which is a parameter really testing algae amounts, and then water clarity. And then for the state system, they have different goal numbers for shallow lakes, which some of our lakes fall under that category, and then they have other numbers for deeper lakes, which we also have some lakes in the deep lake category. So impaired waters, according to the state, are if a lake fails to meet 2 or more water quality standards over a 10-year period. And Burnsville currently has 2 water bodies that are listed as impaired on the state list, and that's Lake Alimagnet and Keller Lake. So we have some work to do on those lakes, but we do have a positive story related to the impaired waters list. So Crystal Lake, which has been on the impaired waters list for some time, is now, as of this year, coming off that list, which is exciting for the city and hopefully exciting for residents that live or use the lake. So that means that over the 10-year average, or over a 10-year period, water quality data has shown that we're now meeting the state standards. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later, but that's exciting for the water quality program. And then on to looking at the data according to the city's water resources plan clarity goals. So the city has set its own water clarity goals that are actually more stringent than the state standards. So we're setting a goal that's higher than the state standards. This information is collected by volunteers. On the right hand of this slide here, it shows a Secchi disc, which is how the volunteers collect water quality or water clarity data. They lower that disc down into the water, and when they can no longer see it, they take that measurement as a reading. Those readings are done throughout the season, and then they're averaged into a yearly water clarity average. So that's where the clarity numbers come from. I wanted to highlight a couple things on this chart, in addition to just giving you a comparison of how clarity compares between the lakes. As you can see, we have some work to do on Alimagnet and Keller Lake for clarity. We're a ways to go before getting to our water clarity goals in those lakes, but those are our impaired waters, so we know that we have some work to do out there. On the other end of water clarity is Lac La Vanne. The water clarity at Lac La Vanne is excellent, well above even the pretty high goal that's set for it. So conditions are great out there. And in general, in our lakes that aren't impaired, we're either exceeding the goals that the city has set for clarity or right around those goals. So the next few slides will be just going through each of the major water bodies individually and just taking a brief look at the data for the past couple years. So for this data table here, we have phosphorus and chlorophyll, looking at nutrient levels and algae conditions. We'd like to see those numbers as low as possible. For the clarity reading, the higher the number, the better for those. So for Lake Alimagnet, as we mentioned, we have some work left to go there. You can see our numbers aren't up to the state standards at this point, but we did have an improved year for phosphorus and chlorophyll on the lake, so we saw some good trends in that direction. We also had a lot of work done last fall in the Lake Alimagnet watershed, which will be talked about in the next presentation. But there was an alum treatment on 2 storm ponds, which should reduce phosphorus flowing into the lake. And there also was iron-enhanced stormwater infiltration trench installed on one of those storm ponds, which will further reduce phosphorus. And hopefully, we'll see those improvements in the water clarity data in the next couple of years at Lake Alimagnet. All right, moving on to Lac La Vanne. Lac La Vanne is doing really great for water quality, so easily meeting state standards and city goals. So our goal out there is really to protect the resource that we have. One of the reasons that Lac La Vanne is in really good shape is it's an old gravel pit, so it doesn't have a long history of buildup of nutrients in the system. So it's a fairly young lake, so to speak. And it also doesn't have stormwater pipes inflowing runoff water into it. So that really protects the water quite a bit as well. And now on to Keller Lake. Keller Lake is our other impaired water according to the state. So we have some work left to do out there. But you can see some improvements in the 2017 data. We do always want to be careful when looking at yearly water quality data because weather conditions can impact that a lot. That's why the state looks at a 10-year span for their data because it eliminates some of those variations. But we did see some positive trends, getting close to the state standard for phosphorus, below the standard for chlorophyll, and close to the clarity goals on that lake. And then Keller Lake also had a very large project installed within the watershed last year, and that went online during the fall. So that project was probably not shown in this data, but hopefully will be shown in the next couple of years. That was the Keller Lake Stormwater Project, which the commission has probably heard about a little bit in the past. But a large underground stormwater detention basin that also has a filtration system to remove up to 70 plus pounds of phosphorus a year. So that is a lot of phosphorus to be removing from the system. And we're really excited to see what our data shows in the next couple of years and how it reflects the work that's being done within the watershed. Then on to Crystal Lake. As I mentioned, Crystal Lake was kind of our exciting success story, the big success story for this year with it coming off the impaired waters list. Crystal Lake was added to the impaired waters list in 2002 for high nutrient levels and low clarity. And that initiated a process where the city and other agencies had to research where those nutrients were coming from, so where all those inputs were coming into the lake, and develop a plan and process for installing projects that would reduce those nutrient inputs and allow the lake to meet state standards. So there was a lot of agencies and people involved in projects since that time. And we're really excited to see that those projects have been successful and the lake is now meeting state standards and is able to come off that impaired waters list. There's a lot of lakes that have gone on that list. There's not a lot of lakes that have come off that list, so it's an exciting thing. Then on to Twin Lakes South. So Twin Lakes South is there's two lakes, a North and South Lake. The one that's monitored is the South Lake. It has pretty similar water conditions to Crystal Lake. I did have a little bit of an uptick in chlorophyll last year, so maybe more algae in the system. That seemed to be a fairly common trend throughout the water bodies last year. But overall, for a small, shallow water body, it's in good condition and meeting the state standards pretty easily. On to Wood Pond. Wood Pond is more of a nutrient-rich system than Twin Lake, so there is higher phosphorus levels and chlorophyll in that system. We did see a bigger uptick in chlorophyll there this past year and a reduction in water clarity as well, so following some patterns that we saw throughout the system. So we have, I'd like to see that clarity number come back up, and hopefully we will, because we do have a planned alum treatment this year in Wood Pond. So alum is a material that will be added to the water column that binds with phosphorus. It precipitates the phosphorus down to the sediments and makes it unavailable for algae growth. So when you do an alum treatment, you get a benefit for water clarity and water quality in general in the system. So we have that going on this year, and we'll hopefully see some results from that in the data over the next couple of years as well. So on to Early Lake here. Early Lake was another lake that was at one point on the state's impaired waters list. But as of 2012, that lake came off the state's impaired waters list. And the water quality data has been holding pretty strong since that time. We had a bit of an uptick in chlorophyll and reduction in clarity this last year, but within the range of what we've seen. And phosphorus level, the reason there's an asterisk there is we think there was probably some issue with the collection process. So some sediment and plant material appears to have gotten in some of the samples. So we're still researching what's going on with those samples. So that's why that's not presented. But the other parameters that we have for the lake are within the range of what we'd expect for out there. Then the last lake in that chain of water flow through the Minnesota River part of our watershed is Sunset Pond. Sunset Pond also had a little more chlorophyll and higher phosphorus levels, but had fairly high clarity levels throughout the season. Sunset Pond is a fairly shallow water body. It was a former wetland that was dredged to hold stormwater, and there's a large earthen dam on the end that holds the water in. So it's a fairly nutrient system with old wetland soils that have quite a bit of nutrients in them. But despite that, we're meeting state standards out there for water quality. We have had some early season algae bloom issues the past couple of years, and the city has been working on a plan to effectively attack those. And I know that was a pretty brief view through some of that stuff, but if commissioners have any questions, I'd be happy to take them.
Go ahead, please.
I just have a comment and a question.
Yeah.
I just wanted to congratulate the city and the mayor and everyone who's worked the last 10, 15 years to make this possible, because it really is a big deal. There aren't many lakes that have been able to come off the list. And then just a quick question on the process of getting off the list. So my understanding is we are clear through the Minnesota EPA, and now do you have to get it okay through the national EPA also, United States EPA, or are we officially off the list?
I believe we're officially off the list. I don't think the national level has any impact on the state's list. Is that correct, Ryan? Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think we're officially off the list.
Okay, great, that's wonderful. And then Oh, I forgot my question. That was my question. Forget it. Thank you.
Any other questions?
So some of these lakes are connected to each other by underground piping system?
Yes.
Okay. Do you have a map at all that shows those connections?
Yes, we certainly do. There's a lot of storm pipes within the city, so there's a lot of connections on that map. The general connection system followed that order that I went through in that first slide. There are some additional ponds along the route, but if commissioners are interested in a more detailed map of how the storm system pipes run, we could certainly get that for you.
Well, I'm interested.
I'm interested too. You good? Any questions? Caleb, thank you very much for
Thank
your
you.
time. And that leads us for our sixth item on the agenda is for public hearing, review Burnsville Stormwater Pollution Prevention Program and the 2017 annual report. Presenting is Emily Erdahl from SEH Consulting Firm. Thank you, Emily.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Emily Erdahl, and I'm a Water Resources Engineer with SEH. And I'm here tonight to talk about the city's 2017 MS4 Annual Report. So thank you, Caleb, for a really good introduction into the stormwater stuff. A quick review of what we're going to talk about this evening. We will talk about the NPDES program, quick overview and some background. We'll talk about Burnsville's MS4 permit, the status of compliance with Burnsville's MS4 permit, some calendar year 2017 highlights, and we will briefly look forward into the future of the city's MS4 permit before we wrap up for the evening. For starters, an MS4 stands for Municipal Separate Storm Sewer System, and what that means is stormwater conveyance that's not combined with the sanitary sewer. And that can be a variety of things from our storm pipes that carry our water throughout the city to ditches, ponds, wetlands, kind of however we move stormwater throughout the city. There's quite a few acronyms associated with all of this stuff, so if anyone gets confused or if I don't explain one, just let me know. But the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System, or NPDES program, was established with the Clean Water Act. And it's a federal EPA program, but it is administered locally at the state level. Here in the state of Minnesota, it's through the MPCA. The city of Burnsville is a Phase 2 small MS4. They have general permit coverage. What that means is they have the same permit coverage as all the other small MS4s in the state. They meet the same requirements, and they have the same permits. The city's coverage began in 2003. The permit was updated in 2006, in 2013, and it is due to be updated again soon. Approximate timeline, I would estimate that coverage will be reissued again in either 2019 or 2020. Burnsville's MS4 permit program includes a stormwater pollution prevention plan, or it's what's commonly referred to as a SWIP. And within a SWIP, there are best management practices and there are goals to meet 6 minimum control measures that are laid out by the permit, and we call those MCMs. There are 6 MCMs in the permit, and they are public education and outreach, public participation and involvement, illicit discharge detection and elimination, construction site runoff control, post-construction runoff control, pollution prevention and good housekeeping for municipal activities, and additionally, there's some other permit provisions, including impaired waters review and tracking process. So the reporting process works. The annual report covers activities from the calendar year starting in January 1 to December 31st. Each annual report is submitted by June 30th of the following year. So the 2017 annual report is due by June 30th of this month. We do have a draft completed and it is available for review. Quickly going over the status of compliance. The city is required to do a self-assessment along with each annual report. The city has met the requirements for the 2017 reporting year. Additionally, the city was audited by the MPCA February 17th, 2016, and they were determined to be in compliance, which is great news. The MPCA audits roughly once every 7 years, and if an audit doesn't go well, it can lead to things like violations or monetary fines. And the city got a good report, so they didn't have to deal with any of that. We're gonna do some 2017 highlights by minimum control measure. So minimum control measure 1, public education and outreach. The city provides educational materials and outreach activities to inform the public on what an MS4 is and how their daily activities contribute to the receiving waters within the city. So as you can see, there's a variety of different educational materials, and the total circulation and audience is quite high. So the city is reaching a lot of those people with that information. Minimum control measure 2 is public participation and involvement. As required by the permit, the city has to provide at least one opportunity annually for the public to provide comments on the SWIP. Here's just some numbers from some previous meetings on the slide, but we're here today to solicit input on the SWIP. If there is any input provided by the public, it would be reported in the 2018 annual report. Minimum control measure 3, illicit discharge detection and elimination. An illicit discharge is anything that enters the MS4 system that's not stormwater. Staff is vigilant and annually inspects outfalls and priority areas for these illicit discharges. Additionally, the city maintains an illicit discharge hotline for residents to also report illicit discharges. There were 3 illicit discharges identified in 2017. 2 were reported by the public, 1 was reported by staff. City staff did follow up on those illicit discharges. 2 verbal warnings were issued and 1 notice of violation, and those took care of those illicit discharges, so there were no further action needed. Minimum control measure 4, construction site stormwater runoff control. This is to protect our MS4 system from active construction sites. So the permit themselves are only concerned with construction projects that are greater than 1 acre. So there were 7 potential projects reviewed in 2017 that were greater than 1 acre, and there were 5 active construction sites in the city that were greater than 1 acre. There were 42 construction inspections completed by city staff, and of those, you can see there were 7 verbal warnings issued, 50 notices of violations, and 76 correction notices. It may seem high, but I think it's more important to focus on there were 0 stop work orders, 0 forfeit of money, and 0 withholding certificate of occupancy. So those proactive warnings and notices really made for there to be no reactive consequences. Minimum control measure 5 focuses on post-construction stormwater management for new and redevelopment. So this is what happens after our construction sites are completed, and we have the opportunity for new pollution generating activities on site. So the post-construction stormwater requirements within the city protect the sensitive areas like our lakes, wetlands, the Black Dog Preserve, and they include BMPs or structural practices like treatment ponds, grass swales, or infiltration systems. The city does enter into long-term maintenance agreements, so these private facilities continue to operate as designed. Minimum control measure 6 is pollution prevention good housekeeping for municipal operations. I kind of consider this the practice what you preach minimum control measure, so this holds the city to their own standards as well. Because of this, the city needs to inspect their own MS4 infrastructure, including structural stormwater BMPs, which are anything constructed to treat stormwater, excluding ponds. They're treated differently in this permit, although they also are structural stormwater BMPs, outfalls, and ponds. Of the 107 total structural stormwater BMPs in the city, 100% were inspected, which is required by the permit, so the city didn't meet that requirement. Of the 219 outfalls, 21% was inspected, and of the 91 ponds, 20% were inspected. Outfalls and ponds need to be inspected 100% during a permit term, so people say roughly 20% annually. The city did achieve that. We're gonna switch gears a little bit and talk about some 2017 highlights. As Caleb mentioned, Lake Alimagnet is impaired for excess nutrients, and there is a TMDL, which has requirements for the city to meet reduction. It is impaired for excess nutrients. And there were two storm ponds that were given alum treatment because of this. They'll receive 3 alum treatments over 10 years to help reduce those excess nutrients. And additionally, one of those storm ponds had an infiltration trench, which you can see in that bottom right photo. That infiltration trench will treat stormwater prior to entering the pond, which will further help with that nutrient reduction. Here are some photos from that construction. Another project that we want to highlight is the Landscaping for Clean Water program. This program is run by Dakota County Soil and Water Conservation District. The City of Burnsville hosts and promotes this program. It consists of an intro workshop and following design workshops. Since 2008, more than 700 residents have attended at least the intro workshop. So the numbers off to the right show the total 2017 program summary for the Landscaping for Clean Water program, and beneath that is the numbers for Burnsville for the 2017 Clean Water program. So you can see that there were 74 participants, and there were 14 installed rain gardens and 3 installed native gardens. So those are great numbers. Here are some photos from the workshop. So you can see there are a couple different learning styles there. Quick look forward. The MS4 permit will expire August 1st of this year. The MPCA can operate underneath an expired permit, and they will. The MS4 permit expires really close to the time the construction stormwater permit does expire, and legally the MPCA cannot lapse on the construction stormwater permit. Therefore, it's become a higher priority. Because of this, we will move forward under an expired permit, and what that means is you just continue doing what you've been doing to meet all the requirements. But eventually there will be a new permit, and that means the city will have to apply for new coverage. They've already completed their Part 1 application, which was just the intent to reapply. And the Part 2 application will really go more in depth and focus on where the city needs to make changes to meet the new permit. That's estimated in summer 2019. It's estimated that coverage will be extended in winter of 19 and into early 2020. And following that, the city would update their program in 2020. This is on kind of an approximate timeline of the MPCA. It could very well shift, so we'll have to see kind of as things move forward. So next steps for today, if there are any comments on the MS4 program, all input will be considered for possible program modifications. Changes would be reviewed by staff, and if they'd implemented, we would report them in our 2018 annual report. So if you have any comments or questions, we can answer them today, or I can direct you to Ryan. Yes.
I was just curious, what would the typical violations be at construction sites?
Sure, this is a great question. So when we have our construction sites and there's a large amount of disturbed soil, you often see things like silt fence, or if you don't have silt fence or perimeter control, that would be a violation. If you have a bunch of exposed soil and no effort to try to stabilize that with an erosion control blanket or seed, that could be a violation. If you have chemicals or paint or other things that could potentially pollute the water just sitting out kind of carelessly, that would also be a violation.
Thank you.
Any other questions? So are we looking for a recommendation or?
Chair Rove, this is a public hearing. I would ask that you would formally open up a public hearing. Although we have nobody in the audience, call for comments, and then officially close the public hearing.
Okay.
For the record.
Okay, yeah, because I was not seeing anybody, I didn't want to go through the pretend part of it.
We do need to go through the process,
Okay,
so.
so we will, at this time, open for public comments, but seeing none in the audience, we will, is it okay to close it?
Correct.
Correct, thank you. So we are going to officially then close the public hearing because there is nobody here, number one. And that leads us to, from a commissioner's perspective, if they want to give an input. Right. Commissioners, any input that would you like to give? Hearing none? we'll move forward. Do we need a formal motion, or we are good with, because we don't have any changes, or we don't have any inputs coming in, so
We're good.
we are good? Thank you very much, Emily. Thanks for your information. That leads us to our seventh item, which is miscellaneous. JJ, do we have things to cover in miscellaneous?
Commissioners, I would just like to remind you that we will meet again in July, on July 16th. That's a little bit later in the month than our normal meeting because of the holiday. And then prior to that, we have an event coming up this weekend on Saturday, the 9th, from 3 to 5 at Terrace Oaks. It is our grand opening of the Nature Play Area. That event is rain or shine. We will be out there. So hopefully we'll have some decent weather. And the public is welcome to attend that meeting, or to attend that event. And we'll be there with activities and things to do, so.
Sounds good. Thank you. Staff, do you want to add anything? Miscellaneous? Oh, staff, you're done, sorry. Commissioners? Hearing none, we'll move to our last item to adjourn the work session. Commissioner, do you have I'd like to have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
And motion moves. And just have a funny question. So if we are trying to do a motion to adjourn and we have a problem, what will happen? Just of anything.
We need the city clerk to make that determination.
I always thought about it because it's part of it. Well, thank you very much and for attending the Burnsville Park and National Resource Commission. Good evening and have a good night.